Hey, welcome to today's webinar on the recipe for chaos, misaligned expectations, and simmering frustrations. We're going to take a little bit of a twist here in the series and begin to zero in on the human relevance. We've been discussing the global chaos from the perspective of the economy, the environment, and government's involvement as well. But we really haven't gotten down to the people, the leaders, and what all of this is meaning to the individual themselves. So our series on global chaos reflected in the various articles and interviews and webinar transcripts, a complex and often unsettling portrait of a world grappling with global turmoil. This central theme characterized a stark paradox that while humanity enjoys unprecedented technological progress and advancements in various fields, a simultaneous surge in social, economic, political, and environmental crises is fueling widespread discontent and a sense of impending crisis. Today, we're going to explore the topic further with Rene Rupert, specifically the role of leadership, people, and knowledge management. So welcome, Rene. Tell us a bit about your career and how you got interested in knowledge, well, let's say people management.
People management first, or the knowledge management is probably a part of it. I wanted to understand everything as a young boy. So I first started with chemistry, materials, and I ended up being a small doctor in chemistry. Then, unhappy about that, I realized the companies, the organizations function in a way that is not always the way expected by people. You can read that in the newspapers. So I decided to spend 1 year at INSEAD, which is get the MBA there. And after that, I concluded I know nothing about the people. That was the last. I'm not sure, but probably one of the last corner I had. I went around across the universe studying relativity from Einstein and everything. I had been in the in the banks and trying to understand what they were doing. Okay, it's fairly easy. And people, it's a complete unknown. Hence, I went my way with starting in industry. I spent 30 years in industry with Dow Chemical, DuPont, de Nemours, and other chemists in all kind of positions, marketing, production, sales, and everything. And there I could realize that we were working hard, very hard, for peanuts. In other words, we were spending Sundays and Saturdays and Sundays, the nights, to recalculate a pump or a stupid desulfurization unit, hoping we would make lots of money with this. I was completely wrong. I observed people was the difference. In fact, we working, all engineers working together a whole night, and we would save $500,000. And if you motivated people, it would be $50 million, avoiding accidents, uh, being made aware that there is a problem on Unit 22 or at this place. So avoiding accidents or becoming all of a sudden much more efficient. So that was a big question mark, and I survived the 30 years with no clear answer. I became general managers of three companies, one after the other, and which were in bad shape. And I came in, and I was told, "Look, your mission is to get the financial situation better." I did nothing, but after 2 years, all problems had vanished, and I hadn't understood what I did in particular, nor anyone probably. But I went to the next company. That was all in Switzerland, by the way. In other words, in Switzerland, you have an easy start because people are not going to go on strike very rapidly. They listen. They are well trained, but if they are not motivated, they do nothing. That's the same than in France or in Canada or in Germany or anywhere else. So soon I understood that I had the capacity to motivate people without doing anything. I like that. Anyway, what happened is in KPMG, someone noticed, an auditor noticed that company is in bad shape. Here comes Rene, and 1.5 years later, everything is okay again, and there is no investment whatsoever, no training, no new machinery, no nothing. Just Rene is there. That's all. And I thought myself, I think I'm a kind of um, doctor, medical doctor for companies. Where and why, no idea. But in fact, I got a huge help when KPMG in Zurich said, Rene, we would like to offer you the job of change manager. Because obviously you do that. They told me I can do it. I said, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a financial guy. I'm an engineer. I can't accept this job and this responsibility. But they insisted. And you know what came out? I
So
met
you
satellite
let
California.
me interrupt you there. So you equate
Yeah,
knowledge management and change management, or not that they're synonymous, but
the link between knowledge management and change management and management, it's the same thing. Yeah, it is. I see no difference in managing change or managing knowledge. I mean, I make a difference, but that can be discussed. I make a difference between knowledge management and knowledge sharing. In the end, if you consider knowledge management is only the technological part of putting information, classifying information, and getting silos and computers and everything. That's what we had uh, in most companies, like DuPont, for instance. In research, they were managing knowledge, but they were not. They were doing nothing about knowledge sharing. And to me, frankly, if you manage knowledge without making sure that it's getting shared, I mean, it's pointless.
so you put an emphasis on the people side of the equation, and you talked about your experience in your career of being confronted with organizations that put the capital into their equipment, into their machinery, and you invested in human capital. That seems to be the primary differentiator between you. And I noted in our discussions how frequently we've cited the distinction between North America, where the mainframe was everything, and then the shift to the handheld. North America was addressing knowledge and change management by introducing new machinery, or maybe causing the need for change management and knowledge management. As the
Yes.
computer emerged, as information technology became the aid to knowledge management. But in Europe, or the emphasis seemed to be cultural, but more on people, teams, social relationships, retraining, conveying knowledge, and, and looking at knowledge management from a people perspective. Am I getting that right?
Not quite. If you look at me as a representative of Europe, you're wrong. A part of my family is American, U.S., and another part of my family comes from Austria. Okay, I would say those that you dream of are probably the Swedes. In Scandinavia, there is a different philosophy of knowledge management, and there is great respect for people. In the south, and the south starts with the North Sea, already England, Holland, they're rough and tough. The Germans, they are maybe a little bit softer, but not quite. And in Spain, or in France at least, people don't exist. In Spain, maybe that's probably a good place, and Portugal. But Italy, Greece, and so people are not really regarded. They are probably disregarded. And I would say, having lived in the US and on this side of the water, I would say the real difference is between the North countries. I don't know so much about Finland, but Sweden and Norway for sure, and the rest of the Western countries, including North America.
So would you that
Maybe, I'm not quite sure. I'm not an expert of cultures, but as I told you just recently, I started my career in Sweden, and I was amazed to see how well I fitted into their philosophy. And when I came back to France, I was frankly devastated by the way people were communicating together. Basically, they are not communicating. You know, for instance, if I send a letter, there is about 50% chance or close to that a North American responds. A Swiss will respond probably right away, and the Swedes, in principle, respond all the time, unless I'm sending a message that can't be read. I mean, that's unreadable. That's then the problem is here, you know. But otherwise, I will always get, or more likely, get an answer from Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, England, maybe. And in France, you just send 10,000 letters, you don't get anything.
okay? Well,
Unless they need you. And yes.
so let's.
So,
I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and in that I've been arguing that advances in technology, now including AI, will initiate a displacement of the professions that is knowledge and that have the knowledge and have had exclusive rights of practice. That'll be history. What's your view?
I don't think so. I think that knowledge in softwares can be and will be considered as artwork. Uh, so there will be, I'm sure, AI helps and let the leaders, I mean, the decision maker, uh, goes much faster. In other words, he saves out of 3 weeks, he will save 20 days. And on the 21st day, he has to be there and listen to what AI is telling him. Basically, AI is a kind of machinery in the forest that goes in front of you and makes the path visible. Then it's up to you where you put your shoes. Uh, I see this rather in this way. So it will never replace completely and decide for yourself automatically. That would be frankly dangerous.
Okay, so
Okay, it depends, of course, it depends on the circumstances, but it could be very dangerous. I think it will help in the sense that it cuts 90% of the work. Uh,
okay, so AI is simply one of the forces and sources of change that we've identified in this recipe for chaos. How can organizations and people adapt? I mean, that's really what you've been zeroing in on in how to
yes.
manage change. What do organizations and people themselves need to do to remain relevant or better to succeed?
Okay. Well, I will. I have a different vocabulary than the usual one, but anyway, I try to use the ordinary and common uh, vocabulary. It's a matter of culture. Now, in about 25 years ago, when I wanted to map culture, I could see that it's not feasible. You know, culture has 1,000 parameters, so you forget about it. And I reduced culture to mindset. Okay, the global mindset or the usual mindset in an organization is very close to what we, what many people call culture. But culture is too vast, too large a concept to be a management tool, for instance. But mindset can be a management tool because you can map it. And as soon as you have mindset on the map, you are well, you can decide and you can see what's happening. So, well, on my maps, I can see all kind of mindsets, and some mindsets of organizations, existing organizations, are obviously fixed mindsets. You know, mindset. I have achieved what I wanted to achieve. I won't move any further. I don't want new things, no change, no knowledge management, nothing that can be new and disturbing. I'm used to produce screws, and I will produce screws further. Okay, that kind of mindset. And there are organizations that are much better prepared for change, and that's when, for me, mindset is the combination of what the people are dreaming of, their aspirations, and the response of the organization where they work, um, telling them you're okay or you are too low, not achieving anything. And that's, of course, a negative perception. So if a company wants to keep afloat, to
Adapt.
stay,
Adapt.
well, they have to adapt. Now, who can adapt? Are those who can adapt are those who are using autonomy, using influence where it makes sense, and that supposes two things. First, their aspirations must be I want more influence where I work. And second, the management must give this influence. They must give the possibility to take influence. In other words, it addresses three parts. Part one is the employee. He must, he or she must appreciate influence, autonomy. They must be open to new things. That's one thing, that's the aspiration. Perception, they must perceive that their management is giving this autonomy or this influence, permitting the influence. So you have managers that are quite open and talk to their people, and they see that their people listen to them. And if they listen, they in fact give them some influence because the employee can react and say, boss, why don't we do this in a different way, and so on.
This distinction that you're pointing out really zeroes in on a concept that I think we both explored at great length, which is learning. The organization that's maintaining the status quo, the individual who does not want to do anything any differently, both of them seem to be resistant
Learning.
of learning, and learning seems to be the common feature that the leader wants to help his organizations continue to learn and create or inspire learning in its staff. Am I getting that right?
The third partner to the story is the state of the art, the market. If you're in a given business and everyone is, for instance, working in agriculture by hand, you know, they're doing everything, no machinery, everything by hand. Maybe that's because the ground, the soil, necessitates that, or they have to. And in that case, you have an organization that has to work individually by hand, repeated work. I mean, a very I say that always the same thing.
Routine.
Okay, routine, right? Very routine work, and then managers maybe should not give much influence to these people, and the people who are working there should not or are not looking for it. And we have all these situations. So I started there. I started with the kind of complexity that people are facing at work. In other words, a very, very routine work. Now, you don't want to have to employ in these kinds of jobs people who are looking forward and want to grow because you know that, let's say, let's put ourselves in 1930, uh, stamps are there and they will be there for another 60 years or so, you know. Okay. So you want people who have no aspirations for influence. You have managers who do not give influence, otherwise they have cows. And you have a process that is perfectly fitted to that. Now, this exists still on the planet, but not too much. And I have defined 5 levels. The fifth level is I want to do everything by myself. I want to be the president in this company and decide everywhere and everything. Okay, that's the extreme. But the number two, after number one, which is at the bottom of the pyramid, number two is a kind of a medical doctor who sits, an expert, let's say, who sits in room 331 at the end of the corridor. But and his wish is to treat patients. By the way, I'm repeating something that was published by Accenture. Accenture saw 4 levels of complexity, and I could send you the original of their publication. That's probably about 20 years ago. Um, the number level 3 is a team that is managed by uh, a person, a boss, and the level 4 is, at least that's the way how I define it, is a college of people. In other words, you have 5 or 6 people. They don't need a manager. They discuss together long enough until they find a good decision. And 5 was the Napoleon, you know, on top of that, who wants to decide everything. Okay, so I can give you, okay, I can send that because it has been published and it hasn't been taken seriously by the trade. I went back to KPMG at that time, telling them, look, we have the beginning of a tool to do what you wanted me to do in the year 1995. They wanted I run change, and I said we don't have the tool to do that because we know nothing about the way people function.
So
Uh,
you've identified styles of leadership. I mean, there leadership. Some have said is you're born a leader, or the situation creates the need for leadership. It seems to me there are some circumstances where you need an autocratic leader. You may be in crisis, and we don't have the time to get into a social process of team building. Uh, am I
that's
right?
level 5. The crisis is level 5.
Right.
If you're a guy who wants to decide on everything quickly, what he needs are a few teams that bring him the information, and he goes it, and it's rough and tough.
So the right leadership needs to take into consideration an alignment of that leadership with the circumstances of the time, and needs to also
Absolutely
ensure that he's got flexible staff that
right.
are agile
Two
enough in
things.
order to handle those different circumstances.
Well, the manager somewhere must understand the sort of project he is giving to his people,
His mission.
his mission, right? And he must realize, okay, is my mission on level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know? And then, do I have the right people? And maybe he can train them out. And that's my job. In fact, it was my job in KPMG to try to push people where they can be efficient. And that's not easy because usually most managers don't know why they are managers, frankly speaking. They've been they tell me very often, my boss told me I should take this mission. So I must be okay with it. Ah, he has no idea neither of the complexity of his job nor of the capacities of his people.
Okay, so recognizing that we appear to be in an environment of some chaos, one is going to expect leaders to be somewhat more necessary right now, given that they need to identify just what the mission of the organization is to mitigate and or capitalize on this chaos.
Mhm.
Where does ethics fit in all this? We've talked about just getting it done, uh, that the end justifies the means and ethics is irrelevant. People talk about the rise of corruption during periods of chaos. Are we
Mhm.
facing a crisis in ethics in leadership today because
Yeah,
of this?
corruption and falsification, fakes, and everything occurs when the at a very specific place on the map, uh, people must have freedom to take influence and to decide a number of things, but they must be frustrated. In other words, they must realize I would like to reach this and this objective with the company, with my department, and so on. There must be a number of rules that go across the path, and then they jump above the rule. They jump over the rule. They say, okay, it's no good, and then they start being illegal. So that's a very tricky subject because very often it's not that bad uh, on the side of the people who cross the borders because it means they create a new way, they imagine a new way, and they are unhappy of the current setting. So all fraudulous action is not necessarily that negative. It's negative for the status quo. But if you look into the future, you may learn from all these people who who don't hesitate to go the correct legal way, but I would say they go almost a legitimate way. Their invention is legitimate, although not legal. And that happens quite often.
Facing that in spades today, where AI is moving at the speed of light. I mean, a million subscribers within the first day. We're talking about new technologies in the realm of AI and whether the staff are being involved, whether IT and HR are working together, whether they're slowing down enough to allow the learning to take place. I mean, we're involved in a world of change. AI isn't the only one, but where it seems to me more than ever before, this is a challenge to leaders to figure out how to make sure their staff and their organization's mission are aligned as they change in the face of competition and emerging technologies and knowledge management.
And the funny thing is, if you are totally aligned, you are paralyzed.
Okay. No,
So,
that was a point I made you earlier. Was does an alignment simply mean we're all happy with the status quo, stay put, or leadership's role is to stretch the organization but not rip it?
right. I mean, at a speed that man can handle.
Yeah. Well, that was
And
one of the points of advice I got when I was into consulting is, Perry, often you have insight far beyond what the organization is ready to take on. You are ripping rather than stretching. And that was advice well taken. I mean, I had to compete and I had to make sure that the customer was satisfied and also capable of instituting the change management plan that may have been laid out. I can recall an engagement with the Alberta Chamber of Commerce where they were asking in the midst of e-commerce what they as an organization might do for the retail establishment. And I got it wrong. They nixed my plan. It was developed with the CEO, got rid of the CEO, because that plan was in fact only instituted 10 years later in the face of e-commerce because they were driven as the power of the board emanated from the retail establishment, which really wasn't ready.
Uh, as soon as I became general manager, these things were coming to my desk.
Yeah.
As long as you are working as a middle engineer and somewhere the lower the better, because you're not facing paradoxal situations. It's good for the company, but it's against its own rules.
Well, and
So
it's not just you know, it's not just companies. It's schools, it's hospitals, it's governments at large, it's corporations, it's entire industries. So I'm gonna shift as we come into wrap up that whether we're talking change management or knowledge management or information management, we've been stressing the need to empower. Now look at future generations. Look at our children today on an assumption that this chaos continues. In fact, it may even get more chaotic. But how do we help future generations navigate the global turmoil effectively? Probably drawing on innovative educational approaches to cultivate critical thinking, problem-solving skills, resilience, a sense of urgency or agency. What can we do to prepare young people to be informed, engaged, and ethical citizens of the world facing unprecedented challenges? I mean, that's a big story. It probably takes you into parenting. It takes you into what they read, what they watch, what they do. But do you want to add anything as we get into a wrap-up mode here? And then I'll be asking Dawn to bring in her perspectives.
I would send them to the middle of India or middle of Tibet or the middle of nowhere, Africa,
Yeah.
to see how people there with nothing but the forest and but the sand, what they can do. In our countries where you can buy nearly everything, children turn to dad and say, "Well, I buy, you pay."
So the
That's certainly not a good preparation to what you said.
So the commitment to learning and the development of resilience requires being under some element of pressure, being faced with some elements of uncertainty, and not mollycoddling our children to the point that they face no risk and assume that they live in a riskless world or the parents oversee their environment. And yet we've been concerned over the last 20 years that this neoliberal world we are living in wants to de-risk society to the point that children may not be ready for this world of chaos. The kids coming out of Palestine may be the ones that are the most resilient, the ones coming out of Ukraine, those that have faced dire circumstances, forced to adapt, are probably more ready for the future than those that have been mollycoddled for umpteen.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really my position. But I have a problem with my own. I mean, a problem. I would not know what to tell my grandchildren. You are a granddad as well.
Sure, but I mean, this is certainly no teacher of mine, but Lenin said, learn, learn, learn.
Yeah, but you can't learn everything. You've seen what already my own CV tells the problem. I wanted to know, so I went to school. I learned chemistry and physics. Wonderful. Then I went to MBA to learn how companies function. I learned. I still didn't know anything. Then I wanted to know how people function, and there was no tool. So, in other words, I really had to go through experience and good judgment, I suppose. Um,
But the key word there is experience. Learning
yeah,
requires experience. If you haven't experienced, how are you ever going to develop resilience? I mean,
uh,
biologically, your adrenal glands need to pump up and be healthy. Adrenal glands don't develop unless they've been exposed to some degree of trust. And if you haven't been exposed, you are highly vulnerable.
absolutely.
Kids that
Yes.
spend their lives on Facebook on an assumption that they can become resilient by living in a virtual world, they got another thought coming.
Well, it's a complete dream. Probably they will have a hard landing. Um,
Look, they're facing a hard landing after COVID. where they've been locked up for 2 years, have not got the social skills that their predecessors had, and are now facing challenges and criticisms in the school system. And we've got a dire rise in mental health issues among kids because they haven't had life experience for 2 years.
I really have to give a lot of thinking, a lot of thoughts to this question because I'm faced every day. I'm wondering, my author is 16. He's saying, okay, you know everything. Tell me what I should learn at university. No idea, because whatever I say may be completely wrong, misleading. I
Yeah,
have probably two or three vague rules, okay, but that's it. You know.
I'll give you a tip. I'll give you a tip. Learn. Go to university and realize it's not the content, it's learning how to learn that becomes the
Okay.
vehicle for
A
survival.
method. Yeah, learn a method how
It's,
to
it's a
learn.
process. It's a
Yeah,
process.
that's a process.
It's somewhat existential, but it recognizes the power and the value of learning. I know in the webinar last week, I made personal comment that my PhD was second to the most powerful process that I ever went through, and that was hitchhiking from Alberta to New York. I learned more in that 5 day, 55 trip journey about humanity than I ever learned through my PhD. That was much more valuable to my life and to the adaptations that I had to make in going
Yeah,
through in careers. And as you talk about your career and the adaptations that you made, it was never ending. And that's where joy emerged because you adapted.
right. With no efforts, in fact. And well, I mean, I didn't suffer, and many people adapt and are suffering. My
That's
parents, for instance, when during the war, they suffered. They adapted, but they suffered. But I never had that kind of situation. I had a easygoing hitchhiking from Norway to Germany and then across Europe. No problem at all. You have to adapt, but it's
So
fun.
there is our campaign. We need to tell kids that in order to get your certificate, you have to earn 1,000 miles of hitchhiking in order to get your certificate for adulthood. Okay, we're into a wrap-up mode with a sense of humor here, and I think that is important in light of the chaos and the discussions that we've had. But
Yes,
let's look at the future with some degree of levity as well. And experience is one of the things that I think we can all fall back on and say it
great,
works.
great. Yeah,
So
very, very.
anything you want to add besides hello to Dawn?
I'm fine. I think we said many things. We have to let that get to the ground and see what's left and what's would be interesting and very special. Right now, I think it was very interesting, funny, and well, we'll do it again. Don't
Okay,
worry.
well, I want to say thank you, Rene.
Welcome.
I look forward to future discussions, and I'm now going to turn the discussion over to Dawn. And Dawn, let's get your perspective on this very important topic.
Okay, thank you very much, Perry, for
Okay,
organizing.
okay, your turn, Dawn. Bye bye. We discussed this in the discussions of global chaos. We have a leadership style emerging, which is quite pugilistic, if you will. We've probably got more global turmoil and wars going on than we've had for some time. So something about power on power has emerged as a leadership style, implying frustrations have now reached a point where they're bubbling up, whether it be in Syria or Ukraine, or maybe the way the US election evolved in the United States, or maybe what's going on in Ottawa. Something is going on right now where people seem to have said enough is enough, and power is being executed to bring about change. It isn't necessarily ethical. Dawn, your turn.
Okay, thanks, Perry. I think this is going to be a hot topic today. As I listened to Rene's and your conversation, I was certainly in agreement with the points that Rene was making, and I thought, when you talk about the crises that we're facing in the latest crisis, I mean, here it comes around again. We're been bombarded with this, and what it is it's change, and we have to know how to deal with change. And when I look at this through my lens of being in the excellence field, my go-to is that we've got a model here of principles and best practices that we know works, and it helps us deal with change, because there's certain practices in there that help you put in a good solid foundation, and there's other practices that help you deal with change. And so I won't bore the audience by going into a list of them, but these things help create stability in organizations, and it helps the leaders in those organizations know what to work on when. And one of the most powerful things that an organization can do is do an assessment to see how they're doing on these things. And especially if they get their input from their stakeholders as well, then they've got a lot of information there to cover in terms of what's going well and what needs to improve. And so then is the challenge for leadership. And this is a segue back to Rene and leadership and ethical leadership and so forth. But I think the big question that looms large for leadership is, okay, we're wanting to invite everybody to go in a common direction, work towards a common aim. Maybe it's strengthening the economy if you're in a country, or it's to strengthen an organization, at that level. And the big question, some leaders are very good at inviting others on that journey and making it meaningful to them and soliciting their input, providing feedback, good communication. But a question that really looms large is the what's in it for me, and the question of self-interest these days. And I think that we're swimming in a sea of self-interest if we look at social media and everybody wanting to have their little 5 minutes of fame, and all that being bombarded with all that information too makes it very difficult for people unless they're able to filter out what's relevant. But in any event, leaders have to make the change that's being introduced or imposed meaningful to the masses, and they've got to invite them to join with them in terms of leading them along that path, and they'll either get cooperation or no cooperation. And I think one of the best examples I've seen in the last number of years about getting cooperation or lack thereof are these social development goals. They've cooked these goals up, they've invited leaders from around the world to come together and discuss them, and all the leaders nod their head, yeah, we're on board, yeah, we're going to work on these things. And then they go back to their own countries, and then they work on whatever they want to work on. Okay. And it's no different in an organization or an industry sector. You really have to think about people and their mindset, their attitudes, their individual differences, their willingness to participate. And so you have to be thinking about all of these things. And you have to also think at the end of the day that people are going to work on what they want to work on. It could be their position in an organization. It could be a country that says, gee, we need to work on these social, economic, or environmental issues, make our country stronger. So I think that is those are factors that play into this today. And I think on the original topic of chaos, I think chaos and all these crises are really depend on what you're paying attention to and how you perceive it and how you deal with it. And I think that's the question number one of your motivation. Are you self-interested, or are you working on making yourself better and giving back to the community? Or what is your mindset? Are you always thinking with a scarcity mindset? Is my glass only half full? Or are you thinking about a growth mindset? How do we make things better and better and better?
Okay, so let me start.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be a little controversial here. We've talked about, or Rene talked about, and you've talked about scenarios. There's one scenario where aspirations count, and it's important for me to know what each individual's aspiration is because I want to increase efficiency and I want to grow.
Yep.
And I think your perspectives as it relates to organizational excellence fit that very well, as did
Yeah.
Rene's early discussion about when you want to grow an organization and develop, it's very important for you to have an alignment of the mission and the caliber of people you've hired or the
Yeah.
caliber of people that you have in staff. But there are other scenarios. And there are
Mhm.
scenarios like I'm getting ready for a war, or I'm in the middle of a depression, or all of a sudden the circumstances are such I don't have the time, nor are the circumstances that were involved in allowing me to spend the amount of time that would be called for to confer with people. And so I surround myself with people who are loyal, and I have the power, and I'm going to make change whether you like it or not. Now, China likes that model. That's very much what happens in tyranny
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Tyranny, you don't have an alignment with the people because you don't have the circumstances, but you have the power and you exercise the power whether they like it or not. There are
Mm.
others that exercise the power because they have a situation which calls for it. But operational excellence needs to be able to fit a variety of scenarios. And
Oh, yeah.
there are circumstances where it is undesirable to spend a whole bunch of time conferring with people when what you haven't been doing for the last 50 years is you haven't been conferring with people, and now you have global chaos. Now, how to get out of that? I can't engage in tyranny then. I have just portrayed a really complex situation. I have ignored people for 50 years. I now
Yeah.
have a rebellion. I can't go and confer with them anymore because they don't trust me. I need to change leadership. And
Yeah.
that leadership needs to say, I will listen to the people. I think Syria is going through that right now, hopefully. But, I threw several hand grenades at you. How do you want to jump into the discussion here?
Well, I think when it comes right down to it, is people want truth, and I think we're living in a world where people are having a hard time distinguishing between what's true and not true. And sometimes it's not trust in leadership, and sometimes you have to do your research to find out what's true or not and narrow down the sources that you trust, right?
Well, yeah,
So I
the,
think that's part of the chaos these days is people are really hungry for truth. And we all live in different countries and there's been different levels of trust in leadership in those countries, given how governments have performed over time.
let me try this. I'm
Hmm.
not disagreeing with you that truth is a
Yeah,
very, very important variable,
yeah, very.
particularly in a knowledge-based economy.
Yeah.
But I think what we're also seeing is people thirsting to know who has power.
Oh, yeah.
They want to know who has adequate influence to bring about peace, if you will, or bring
Yeah.
about stability, or
Yeah.
bring about the end of deficits. And so
Mhm.
I think what you've just seen in the US, and to some extent what we saw in Alberta with the election of NDP, is when people get ultimately frustrated, truth doesn't matter anymore. Good manners don't matter anymore. Power matters. I don't like that. None of us, none of us, I think, in this group want to advocate for power. But I think what we're seeing is the emergence of people's frustration after years and years and years of misalignment of their values, and finally deciding, like it or not, I'll accept power for a while. And hopefully the circumstances will be such to mitigate or mute, or we'll get about solutions and we'll get about something more civil. But I think people are right now ready to accept a certain amount of civil disruption in the interest of power taking its course to resolve some no longer tolerable problems, like debt.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, I think that people want truth. There are a lot of people in Western countries in Canada and the US are really, our lives were based on traditional values. And we have a fair bit of cognitive dissonance when things upset that. And we're looking for truth or we're confused about, what's going on, right? So,
But let me
and I think I see
truth
that in the
not
governance of our country as well. I mean, you don't, you can't, it's hard to tell these days with those that are governing us if they're trying to sell us something with the latest narrative or
but are
they
you
are telling the truth.
Are you referring to truth in terms of how I will manage, or truth in the means that I will, or the means that I will employ? What specifically are we zeroing in on when you say people want truth? They want truth about what the leader is really going to do or how he's going to do it.
I think it's really important for people to see the words and the behavior. So if somebody says, I'm going to do this, you expect them to do it.
Okay,
And if they don't do it, then you think, wow, what they've said and what they've done there's a mismatch here. I can't trust this person. They
it's
didn't tell me the truth.
it's truth about how they're going to go about executing power. Peter, you want to jump in here?
Yeah.
I was just going to add, and thank you, Don, for your comments, but it strikes me today that more people are being driven by beliefs than by seeking the truth. So they have a preformed notion, and then they seek those who have the same notion. And this is how we get these silos, I think, in
Mhm.
social media.
Okay,
I
so
don't
Yeah.
think they're seeking
well,
truths. I mean, they're thinking it might be truth, but it's based on their uninformed or informed beliefs.
okay, so what you've articulated there is something that just came out recently about the word of the year was polarization.
Yeah.
Is we have this dichotomy of divergent views, but under those circumstances, a leader emerges that says, I will bridge these divergent views, or I have my own views. Jesus arrives, or Napoleon arrives, or Trump arrives and says, I'm going to bring these forces together, or I'm going to ignore them all together and take you my way. Gandhi was another example. But it does come back to leadership and how that leadership proposes to execute power, which comes back to Dawn's view is
Mm.
who will win the leadership race in Syria will either have the most power or the most influence over the views of people that it aligns with, internationally or within that country.
It's money, power, and control that makes the world go around. I
So
mean,
it's
I
not
think
truth.
but
It's
if
not
I
truth.
it is, but you know what? I don't think I think it's people's priorities are pretty screwed up, and we've been reinforcing the wrong things over quite some time now. And I mean, if people were more centered on, bettering themselves and bettering others, I think we'd have a much different situation on our hands.
We do, but that's not the situation. That's an
No?
aspiration. You have that as an aspiration, as we all do, to seek peace again, to seek
Yeah,
civility, to seek
yeah.
social development, that we will all work in this kumbaya together to make a utopian, better world. But what we have is people that believe the way to get there isn't through a vision, isn't through grace, but through power.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the one thing about Trump, I mean, he's really appealed to the American people and obviously got everyone's attention with the Make America Great Again. It's a mantra, and it's a mantra that's been part of the United States for a really long time. There it's all about we're Americans, we're proud to be Americans, and America's a great nation, and let's make it great again. So it fits beautifully, and it captures everybody's attention and their confidence. And they finally think, oh my goodness sakes, we finally got a strong leader. And we're hungry for good leadership.
So parsing that, make America lead again implies that America isn't great anymore. We have problems that need to be solved.
Let's make America great again is the mantra, and even the mantra of Robert Kennedy, make America healthy again. I mean, these things really resonate with the people
Okay, but
because they're thinking about the people, and they're thinking about those people's lives, right? And I think most people can identify with that that are part of a society, right?
I agree, but for it to resonate, people have to be frustrated.
Oh, yes. And who
Okay,
wouldn't be frustrated with the way that leaders have been conducting themselves? I
sure.
mean,
So,
it's insanity.
so
It's
in the argument
insanity
of
out there.
alignment, people have the leadership of the time has not been acting in alignment with people as we view
No,
important to achieve excellence in organization or in nations. If you don't
no.
work in alignment in a democracy anyway with the
Yeah.
people, you will ultimately face chaos, and power will ultimately emerge to fix that.
Yeah, and just I think building on Peter's point about people offer the wanting to be part of a community, and the fact we're social beings, and people go to a group where they feel comfortable. Yes, and you might end up with polarization, but I mean, I think that leaders should be able to find ways of uniting people, whether you're in an organization or in a country.
Okay, so it's now 1912. We've had a revolution.
Mhm.
Trotsky emerges and says, I have a vision. It differs from the vision of the previous czars. There are going to be people that will agree with me. They're the Reds, and there are people that are going to disagree with me, and the Whites. And to hell with the Whites. I will use power in order to institute my vision, whether the people are aligned with it or not. Now that's an extreme, but I mean, I think
Really?
that
Not
metaphor,
really.
that metaphor relates to what's going on in Canada or in the US right
Yeah,
now.
we see it right now here.
Exactly.
There's our federal government has gone off in directions that don't align with our traditional
You're right.
values.
You're right.
And we've got a fair bit of unrest about that. But the problem is I think unfortunately most people are followers and have a real deference to authority. And so only a few brave people speak up or cause a little bit of a fuss.
Right.
There's a lot of people might be thinking the same thing, but they're afraid to speak up because they can be ostracized or canceled. And that's a very strong desire we have to remain part of the herd or the community, right? So
And you're
that's the
saying,
problem.
I mean,
I think that's the problem.
when we hear of who Trump, for example, is selecting for his cabinet, that one of the principal principles that he uses is loyalty.
Yeah.
I don't have the time to go around talking to all my people about every single thing that they need to do. I need to know that they are loyal to my mission,
Yeah.
whether it be in the Congress or the Supreme Court or the Senate. I'm not going to worry about how you are behaving because you have been selected based on loyalty to this particular vision and this person.
Well,
Now,
some people can come together too because they want to work on certain issues. And they have found each other and they're in agreement that some of these issues need to be looked at and taken care of, right?
finding
So,
finding the leader who in that vacuum, and we've got a vacuum right now potentially in Canada, although Pierre is sitting there in the wings. When you have a power vacuum, during that period, you're going to see a certain style of leadership emerge. And in politics, it's usually about power. Who has adequate influence, either the adequate money, adequate control the media, adequate leverage over what Hoover has in the files about you as an individual. There's leverage that is going to be used in politics in order to achieve the level of power that's needed to become the leader. It's not pretty. If any of you
Very,
are in a corporation or in politics, and you think your kids should go there, you better be damn sure that they are very, very different than their neighbors. Power and management of power is ruthless.
yeah, I think the best example is Stalin, actually. Stalin had no trust of anybody and even eliminated his servants near the end. And it was just on and on, he was so
Well,
frightened. And Trump sort of fits in that model so well.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, well, maybe it does. The
He
point that
throws them under the bus. He doesn't eliminate them in the same way as Stalin.
well, but
Yeah, he just puts them out the crowd.
that many people don't know that Stalin, the
Yeah.
evidence that Stalin had that someone was going to be disloyal was not necessarily an act. It was a suspicion. If you were suspected of being unloyal, you could end up in a gulag. You could end up killed. Now, most of us live in a world of evidence. You've got to have some evidence,
Yeah, but
all
Trump has usurped that
could have been your DNA.
system.
It could have been what your father did, what your mother did, or what your. This is a world we are not familiar with and would be very uncomfortable because you really have to hide almost everything. The political speaking of people, and I cite this in my editorial this week about going to the Czech Republic in 1969. And while I was in the Republic, I had the opportunity to visit. This was just after the Russians had reestablished tyranny in a country that thought under Dubček that they had become free again. But the Russians had invaded in '68, and I went in '69 at the invitation of the publisher of Darkness at Noon, Kessler. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to visit Wenceslas Square, visit the castle, visit Charles Bridge. And as we walked around the city, every now and then, my guide, who is a friend, said, "Don't speak here," or "Don't talk there." We go by the American embassy, don't say a thing. There were places that were safe to speak and places not safe to speak. Safe places not to think. And as I was leaving, and this is a tearjerker. As I was on the station platform ready to leave, and I thought, I can just get on that plane and train and go. And the person that was with me said, good luck. Appreciate that for us, tomorrow is always worse than today. I had never lived in or experienced, and to this day, never again did I experience living with anyone who always felt that tomorrow would be worse than today, unless they were sick. Think about that as a culture of living in an environment where tomorrow, that is so alien to the, quote, faith that we have as optimists, that we have adequate influence, we're adequately accepted, our aspirations are listened to, we have neighbors who we care about, we don't worry about, we have faith that the environment we live in is grounds for reasonable optimism.
I don't feel very confident or very optimistic about the future at all right now.
But
And
you
I
get
think
up, you get up each morning and you take initiative, and there are things that you do. You show aspiration when you're coming to our various events. You speak up. You show some degree of interest in expressing yourself in the belief that you may have positive influence. Just expressing yourself is a sign of optimism. But the people who get depressed and sit in an environment of tyranny that are terrified that Big Brother is going to pick up on something, whether it was their Jewish heritage or whether it's something that their child said in the classroom. Can you imagine living in an environment like that? Because those environments are real. Syria went through that. The closing down of free expression is exactly that.
And that's what's happening in Canada today, one bill at a time, one behavior at a time.
Well,
And what scares me more than anything about losing our rights and freedoms that I think most of us have cherished for a lifetime is the will of the people. Because who can change that in a minute? If you get enough people to stand up, you can affect the change. But if so many remain silent, and there's only a few brave few that'll stand up and say, "Hey, this doesn't smell right," I think that's what our downfall could be.
So this closing down of free expression, or what you might call political correctness, can come from the right or the left. This is not politically aligned with one party or another. And I get into those arguments all the time. Well, UCP's doing this, therefore we ought to hate that. Both parties have been subjected to this criticism of aggression against free expression.
But I always think back to the Milgram experiment. How many people spoke up and said, "Hey, this isn't right. I'm not participating in this anymore." And the vast majority went ahead. 69% went ahead because they were at a deference to authority. Somebody in a white lab coat telling them to do something. This is what worries me more than anything. Or the percentage of sheep we have in our population, really.
The 69% did speak up or didn't?
Did not. They kept going on with that experiment where they would shock the person in the other room if they got the answer wrong. And a lot of them went right to the end of the scale. They thought that they weren't even hearing from the person in the other room anymore. They thought something had happened to them, and they kept doing it. It was just horrifying.
Well, we saw that in Germany.
Yes.
That in Syria. We saw that where tyranny does in fact reign and position itself, and it takes an extraordinary amount of time before that finally gets reversed, where an adequate 15% emerge that say enough is enough and take action. So it isn't going to come from the 69%. It's going to come from the 31% ultimately taking action when they have adequate power or influence or can manipulate.
Yeah, and those the brave few that do stand up, and we've seen them in the last number of years with some of the things that have been going on here, they get shunned, they get canceled, they
You're
lose their jobs. I mean, it's absolutely amazing to
I
me. And I think to myself, these are the people among us, a lot of them are speaking their truth and can be trusted, and they're brave as all get out to be able to stand up and speak their mind, and they're doing this for the benefit of all of us, you know. And it's funny how long it takes us to figure that out until we circle around and think, oh my goodness, these are the good leaders, these are the heroes amongst us.
Now, one of
but
the
it could only be a few people, eh? I was telling Perry not too long ago, I met this young couple from China. They were just over here for a short time on some academic thing. And I said, okay, what do you think about living in Canada? He says, I love it. I love it. He says, back home, we're not allowed to speak about anything. And if we do speak up, he says, they have ways of coming at you through the side doors, you know. And so this young lad, he was really keen on staying in Canada if he could, because the opposite is over there, staring him in the face when he gets off the plane, if he's too vociferous.
I think, Jeff, I'm sitting here trying to remember who it is I had a conversation with recently that said, well, while they felt it might be extreme, they were willing to tolerate free expression even in the extremes. Because as soon as you start to put these guardrails down, whether they be guardrails to the right or guardrails to the left, the closing down of a speaker at a university, the railing of Gaza this or Gaza that, that you are on a slippery slope to political correctness. Was it you, Jeff?
I think I said something to that effect in an email string.
So was I listening?
Well, what I was saying is that I'm very nearly a free speech absolutist, but not free speech without the rights of others having free speech to respond to that.
Yeah.
I mean, it works not, it's not a one-way street, right? So you should also be prepared to, you know, hear some response from people that are listening to your expression of your free speech, and you may not be happy with that response. And I think people should be able to say whatever they want, wherever they want. But I also mentioned in that note that social media platforms have no such obligation to protect our free speech. They are businesses, and they are mostly ad funded, and they depend for advertising revenue. And so, you know, they limit people's free speech. They moderate content. That's a fact. Free speech protections in our charter and in the US Constitution relate to our speech as it pertains to our government, but not on a social media platform. And people are often confused about that. So
Trump is already going after free speech. He's already trying to sue various people who, you know, even came out late for delivering.
And by the way, Musk talks about himself as a free speech absolutist. He owns Twitter, but try and post some content. You express your free speech on Twitter, and then say something that isn't aligned with Musk's interests or views, and you will get shut down so quickly, or you will get pounced on by a billion bots or other people. So it's not really.
So if there's a lesson to be taken away from this discussion, it's monitoring your leader's behavior as it relates to free speech. We've been talking about the ethics of power, the ethics of leadership. And when someone starts to compromise your capacity to be free in speech or otherwise, you should have a sensitivity. Critical thinking would say that this is not something I want to see more of. I'd rather see less of. And what are the mechanisms in order to contain that? So my message is one of process. I can't tell you whether or not it's right or wrong, but I can tell you I'm sensitive and I'm watching. And Trump has triggered a sensitivity among many of us. I'm not willing yet to say that what he has in mind as an end justifies the means, but I'm certainly watching very, very carefully. 5:30,
Mm.
I'm going to say Merry Christmas. I'm going to say have faith, have optimism. Find yourself during this holiday in a social context with someone you care about and express it.